I'm going to share with you for a few minutes this morning, and I am excited to do that. We're going to be looking at a lady that is not maybe often talked about, or when she is talked about, she's not talked about very nicely. And so we're going to look at the story of Hagar today. And I want to tell you today, this morning, friends, ladies and gentlemen, that God is not done with you yet. God is not done with you yet. Now, if you've got your Bibles, you can turn to Genesis chapter 16, and we're looking at verses 1 to 4. And the Bible says this: Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. And so she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said, and after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. And when she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Many years ago, and I'm old enough to remember this. I wasn't around when it was created, but I do remember reading it when I was younger. There were these series of magazines called Reader's Digest. Did anybody ever see those? And they had a whole bunch of articles in there, and they would tell stories, and there was recipes, and I would always read the comic section because that was a part. The funny stories, I liked that part. But there was this article that was printed in a 1961 edition of Reader's Digest, and it was about a gentleman by the name of Thomas Edison, who we've all probably heard about. He was a great inventor, a great man, very creative, very diligent, and he gave us a lot of really amazing things. And the story actually was on the account of his son, Charles. And Charles was telling this story about how he remembered one night when they were at home, the family was at home, he was there with his mother, his father, his sisters, and a fire broke out. And a fire breaks out in his father's laboratory, that place where he had all of his ideas, some of his inventions, all of his blueprints, all of the things that he'd written down, that he'd been working on. It was there in his laboratory, and the lab catches on fire. And so the fire causes huge damage, like $2 million worth is what the article said. But the whole thing burnt to the ground. All of the stuff that he had, all of the things that he'd worked on for much of his adult life were gone in an instant. I can't imagine what was going through his heart as he stood there watching everything go up in flames. And in this article, Charles recounts that how his heart was broken for his father as he stood there and he watched everything burn, because he knew what was in his father's laboratory. He knew what his dad had been working on. He knew how tirelessly he'd worked on ideas to make sure that they could put together and they actually worked. And so he sat there and he stood there and his heart was aching for him, because his father at this point, when the fire had happened, was 67 years old. He was no longer a young man, and everything that he'd worked on was up in flames. And as his father was standing there looking at his laboratory burning to the ground, looking at his life's work burning to the ground, he looks at his son and he says, "Son, go get your mother. Go get your sisters. They have never seen a fire like this before." And he just stood there and he watched. And when his son objected and said, Dad, no, like, we got to try and put this fire out, his dad's like, "No, go and get them. Don't worry, it's all right. Most of it is just rubbish anyways." And so later, as the fire was put out, and I'm sure neighbors had come to see, and people in the area were coming to watch what happened, and eventually they were able to get this fire out. And Thomas Edison was standing there in the ruins, and he said this, he said, "Although I am 67 years old, I will start again tomorrow." And as he's standing there in the ash, in the smoke, in the burnt rubble of all that he had done, he stood there and he looked at it and he's like, "I'm going to start again tomorrow." And he stuck to his word, because immediately the next day he began to build again. Immediately the next day he began to write again, and he began to draw, and he began to create, and he began to put things together. Immediately the next day he began to work again. He didn't have to lay off any of his employees. As he started working, within 2 days, he created a design for a portable searchlight. Within 3 weeks, he created and designed a phonograph. Within 6 months, he was in a park demonstrating his latest invention to all who would come to see. See, even though he was standing there in the rubble, and even though everything that he'd worked so hard for was burnt to the ground, he didn't give up. In that moment, he stood and he said, I will do this again. Now, I can imagine the people who were standing beside him, watching all of this, looking at his age, understanding who he was. I could imagine they would have been like, oh, he's done now. Like, look at that guy, look at that old man, look at that fool. He spent all these years building, and now it's in ashes. I could imagine what the people were saying. Oh, he's done. He's never going to do anything again. Oh, this is it for old Thomas. He's out. I can imagine what some of us might have said if we were the ones standing beside him, watching everything that he had burn to the ground. Some of us ourselves might have said, oh, well, it's over. Oh, well, he's finished. He gave it a good try, but it's done now. And people would have taken that one night, that one catastrophic, devastating, heartbreaking night, that one night, they would have looked at them and they would have categorized Thomas Edison, and they would have been like, this is your defining moment. Your whole life ended up in this. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of people do. They look at bad moments and they make that the verdict of your life. Unfortunately, that's what people do. They look at the bad decisions, the hard times, the places where you've lost, and they look at that and they take that and they make that the verdict of your life. See, I want to tell you today, friends, that one bad moment is not your whole story. And I want to tell you today, friends, one moment of loss is not your whole story. And I wanted to tell you today that one bad decision is not your whole story. One setback is not the end for you. See, not only do other people look at us and judge us when things go wrong in our life, because things are going to go wrong, guys. I'm sorry, it's not always going to be perfect. And I'm sorry, it's not always going to be roses and candy and chocolate like we got this morning. Sometimes it's going to be hard. Sometimes it's going to make you want to cry. Sometimes it's going to make you want to scream. Sometimes you're going to stand there and wonder, what is happening with my life? Why is this going wrong? Why isn't my marriage working? Why are my children wayward? Why can't I pay my bills? See, there's going to be hard times in all of our lives. And not only will people look at us and judge us by what we're going through, but sometimes we ourselves look at us and judge us by what we're going through. And so sometimes in our head, we begin to judge ourselves by our loss. We begin to judge ourselves by our bad moments. We pass a verdict on our own lives when we mess up and do things wrong. We pass a verdict on our own lives when things are hard and tough. We think it's the end, and then we give up. So much for that. I tried. It didn't work. And so the dreams are cast away. The hopes are gone. We just feel like it's the end. And there have been so many times when this has happened to people, and they fall into depression and they fall into despair because they allow one bad moment to end their story. Because they allow one bad decision to end their story. Because they allow loss or difficulties to end their story. Can you imagine? If one bad moment could really end our stories and our dreams, where would we be standing today? Would we still be married? Would we still have a job? Would we still have any friends? Can you imagine? If we allowed one bad moment to end our stories, where would we be standing? So the Bible is filled with so many characters and stories of characters who had bad moments, who did things that were terrible, awful. When you look at it and you read some of these character stories and you're like, what was Moses thinking? He killed a man. What was Paul thinking before he was Paul? He was Saul, and he killed a bunch of Christians. What were these men thinking? What was David thinking when he took Bathsheba and killed Uriah? All bad moments. All bad moments. All bad decisions. All bad things happened to them. But they didn't allow those moments to define them. And I want to tell you today that God does not allow those moments to define us. See, God's plan for us is not canceled because we mess up. And God doesn't cancel your destiny or his dream for you or his call for you because you have a moment of failure, because you have a moment of weakness, because you experience pain and loss. God doesn't count you out. He doesn't dismiss you. And I want to tell you, friends, today that we cannot allow our mistakes. We cannot allow our bad decisions. We cannot allow our failures and our losses to define us. Because when we call it quits, in the end, we're the ones that lose. We may not have won the first time. It's okay. Get up and try again. You'll win eventually. Maybe it'll be the next time. And it's a sad thing. It's a hard thing because when people use bad moments to define us, when they use bad moments to categorize and be like, well, this is all she'll ever be. This is all he'll ever be. This is what the life is going to look like for them. When people use those bad moments, they're trying to cancel what's already inside of us. See, they are using the bad moment to make it something bigger than just a problem or just a disagreement. The Bible tells us, Jesus, when he was on the Sermon on the Mount, he says in Matthew 7:3, he says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and you pay no attention to the plank in your own? See, now look at this. Jesus is not saying that there wasn't a speck. Jesus wasn't saying that that person didn't have a problem, that they weren't going through a hard time, that they didn't have a difficulty. Jesus is not saying that the speck is not there. He's not saying that there wasn't a real problem or a setback. But what he is saying is that the person who is obsessed with the speck in your life, the person who's obsessed with the problem in your life, they are actually ignoring the fact that they have a plank in theirs. And a plank is bigger than a speck, my friends. A plank is always bigger than a speck. And I want to tell you this morning, when you make a situation worse than what it actually is, you are actually the person with the worst problem. Because you are disregarding the plank that is in your own life to focus on the speck that is in somebody else's. And when we refuse to release people from their worst moments, when we refuse to forgive their mistakes, and when we keep them locked into the things that they did, the things that they were, the persons that they were, we're not actually declaring or protecting truth. We're protecting ourselves. That might not be nice to hear today, but as long as we keep focusing on someone else's failure, on someone else's mess up, on someone else's downfall, then we put the attention on them and not on ourselves. Because then nobody looks at the planks that we have in our own lives. And so looking back at Hagar now, I don't know about you, but so many times when I've heard people talk about Hagar, it's never been good. Hagar has always gotten a bad rap. She's always been made out to be a bad woman. She's always been made out to be the villain in the story, that evil mistress, that adulteress, the one who wanted to take the promise. She's always been made out to be the bad person. Every single time. I don't know if you can attest to that, but every time that I have heard about Hagar, it has never been good. It has always been about how bad she was. And most of the teaching and most of the preaching that I've heard about her has only led to her having a bad reputation. she's always had a bad reputation. And I want to take a few moments and unpack her life for you, because her whole life was defined by one moment. Her whole life. See, the Bible tells us in Genesis 16:4 that when she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. She had one reaction, one very human response to an impossible situation. See, before we hear about Hagar, there is no record of any transgressions in her life. There's no record there saying that she lied, that she cheated, that she robbed from Sarah and Abraham, that she mistreated them, that she didn't do her job. Like, there's no information about Hagar to say that she was an evil woman. There's no information to say that she was a schemer or a plotter or anything like that. There's no information there to show that she seduced her way into power. The Bible describes her as a slave, a handmaiden, someone who had to do the bidding of Sarah and Abraham because she worked in their home. She was just a girl doing her job. And I want to say to you today that if anything in this situation, Hagar was actually misused and mistreated and abused by Sarah and Abraham. And she actually ended up being the victim in this story. She was the victim. She was put into a situation that she could not get out of. See, in our story, we all know the story of Sarah and Abraham. The angel came to them and said, "You will bear a child." And Sarah didn't believe it was going to happen because she's like, "I'm old. I haven't had a child in all of my 99 years. How am I going to have a child?" And so Sarah decided, well, I'm going to make my own way in this, and I'm going to give Hagar, my servant, to my husband, and through her, I'm going to make a family. This was Sarah's plan. This was Abraham's plan. This was their plan to use Hagar to fulfill the promise of God in their life. Hagar was just sweeping up the front yard. She was just folding the linen. She was just doing what a servant would do in those times. She wasn't asked to be part of this plan. They didn't consult her as they were making this plan in their bedroom or in their living room or wherever they were. They didn't say, "Hey, let's ask Hagar what she thinks about this. Hey, maybe Hagar might want to help us." They didn't ask her. They didn't ask her to be part of the plan. They didn't ask her to be part of the conversation. They didn't ask her what she wanted. They didn't ask her about her dreams or her hopes. They didn't ask her what she wanted to do with her life. They didn't ask her anything. They just said, "Hey, let's use her to fulfill the plan of God in our lives." She was used. She was used, friends. She was used to fulfill Sarah's longing for a child. They didn't ask her. And so her story actually begins with someone else's decision. When she's introduced to us because she was pulled into a situation that she didn't ask for. When we start hearing about her, we start hearing about the story that she was pulled into, not her own. When we hear about Hagar, when she's actually introduced to us, she's introduced to us in a power struggle, in a family struggle that had absolutely nothing to do with her. The promise never came to her. She wasn't there when the angel appeared. We don't know. It doesn't say. She was just a bondservant, a slave in the house of Sarah and Abraham. And so she gets called into this meeting, and Sarah says, again, doesn't even ask her. Sarah says, "You're going to sleep with my husband. You're going to be his wife, and you're going to produce him a child. And when you produce that heir, it will be ours." Hagar became the victim. Abraham and Sarah stripped her of her dignity, of her choice, of her own dreams, of her own hopes. She had no say in this situation. She was told, you have to sleep with Abraham and you have to produce an heir. You have to. And when she became pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. And a lot of times people take this part here about her. They take this part about how she was feeling about her situation and they define her whole story. Look at her. She should be grateful. Why isn't she happy? Oh, she despised Sarah and Abraham. She wasn't happy with what her situation was. She wasn't happy to be pregnant with Abraham's child. No, she wasn't, because she despised her mistress. Now, I want to tell you something, friends. You don't get to this point unless you've been hurt. And you don't get to this point unless you've been abused and misused. You don't hate someone. Despise is hate. You don't despise someone if they've been good to you. You don't despise someone if they've treated you well. You don't despise someone if they've respected you and loved you and honored you and cared for you. You don't despise someone who has treated you like that. You despise someone when they have mistreated you, when they have abused you, when they've taken you for granted, when they've disrespected you, when they've harmed you. That's when the despisement comes. Hagar was angry because of what Sarah did to her. Sarah made her a mother. Sarah made her a wife. Sarah never asked her, hey, what are your dreams? What's your dream guy like? When do you want to get married? Do you even want to be a mother? How many kids do you? There was no discussion. Hagar was angry. She was hurt and she was disappointed. And what's worse in this situation is that the people who were supposed to be the examples of godliness, and the people who were supposed to be representatives of God, and the people who were supposed to be a safe place for her, were not. They were not. They were not safe. They did not care for her. They did not look out for her. They didn't love her. She was a means to an end. So we have Hagar in this situation where her dreams have just been crushed. Her hopes have just been crushed. She has been forced into a situation she didn't want. I think her reaction was acceptable when you look at what her story is. And I think a lot of times people look at her and they define her by this moment, but they don't stop to think, why did she get here? Why is Hagar here? Why is Hagar feeling like this? Why is Hagar acting like this? People disregard the fact that she has a story, and part of that story is filled with trauma. Part of that story is filled with her being wronged. Part of that story is her being taken advantage of. And so she's in this situation and she's in a place where she despises Sarah. And a lot of times when we look at people, we don't realize that there actually is a lot of trauma that they're carrying. Sometimes we look at people and we look at how they're behaving, and we look at the dysfunction in their lives, and we look at how they conduct themselves, but we don't look at the fact that there might be something there causing it. We don't look at the fact that there actually could be trauma, and they actually might be in survival mode. See, when a person experiences trauma in their life, it affects them deeply. It affects how they think. It affects how they react. It affects how they interact with people. It affects how they receive people, because a lot of times they're just on guard. It affects how they communicate with people and how they make friends or even receive love, because they're always looking from the shield of trauma. And sometimes behaviors might look irrational or defensive or angry, or a person might seem like they're emotionally distant, or they don't want to connect to you, or their life looks like chaos. You ever seen a person whose life looks like chaos and you stand there, you're like, what is wrong with you? I want to tell you today that we shouldn't be asking, what is wrong with you? We should be asking, what happened to you? We should be looking past the chaos and look at the source of the situation. Because most people, when they're healthy, don't act like they're dysfunctional. So if you're seeing dysfunction, it probably means that there's trauma. Now, I'm not saying these bad behaviors should just be given a pass. No. With bad behavior, there are consequences. Bad behaviors, you need to deal with them. But what I am saying is that we have to get past the what is wrong with you and find out what happened to you. And too many times we pass judgment on people and we just disregard them and we cast them away and we just think they're no good, but they're actually carrying a story that they don't know how to deal with. They're actually carrying trauma that they've never been freed from. They've actually been hurt so deeply, they don't know how to move past that hurt. We have to, friends, not only what is wrong with you, we have to look at what happened to you. Why are you behaving like this? Why are you acting like this? What happened to you? See, in this story, we see that Hagar was handed a position that she didn't ask for. And sometimes that happens in life. We get pulled into situations we don't ask for. Our family does that. Our parents do that. Our children does that. Our workplaces, they do that. Friends, they do that. We get pulled into situations that we don't ask for, and we get asked to solve problems that we didn't even create. But in the midst of being pulled into it, and in the midst of being sought after, you get entangled in this situation that you don't know how to deal with now. And that was Hagar. She was brought into a situation that she never asked for. And suddenly, she gets pregnant and she realizes, I might have some leverage here now. Because this is what Sarah wanted. And so, although she was wounded, although she felt powerless, she now felt she had some leverage. And then we find in the story that although what she was doing was not right, it was understandable. Because then things begin to get bad between her and Sarah. I want to share this with you, morning friends, and I need you to hear this, that there are a lot of people in our church, in this world, in our circle, in our families. There are people out there who are just like Hagar, who have been swept into situations that are not their own, who've been swept into things that they didn't ask for. And they have been swept into circumstances that they didn't choose. And now they're living somebody else's dream, not their own. And now they're living in somebody else's call, but they're not in their own. And now they're living in a situation that they never asked for, but they don't know how to get out. And like Hagar, they signed up for one thing. Hagar only wanted to be a servant. She didn't want to be a wife and a mom. She's just like, let me do this job. Let me make a way for myself. She got pulled into this situation. And sometimes in life, some of us have been pulled into things and delivered things that we didn't ask for, we didn't bargain for. Maybe you know what I'm talking about this morning. Maybe you know the feeling. Maybe you've been there. Maybe right now you feel trapped in circumstances that are beyond your control. Maybe right now you're in a difficult relationship and you don't know how to fix it. Maybe you started dating someone and now you're pregnant and you didn't intend for all of these things to happen, but now you're here and you weren't prepared for this yet. Maybe you went to the doctor and they gave you a diagnosis that has just rocked your world. And now is taking you down a path you never planned for. Maybe your marriage didn't work. And now you're sitting in a divorce and your life has taken a whole different trajectory and you don't know what to do. Maybe this job that you had given so much for, worked so hard for, put everything in, and they just let you go. And now your world is upside down. Maybe somebody robbed you. They broke your trust. They promised you something and didn't deliver. And now you don't feel safe in a space where you should be safe. And like Hagar, you might just feel like you're in a place where you have to pick up the pieces because you're living in a story that somebody else wrote for you. But I want to tell you something today, friend, that your story doesn't have to end there. And I want to tell you, no matter what you're feeling, no matter what you're facing today, I want to tell you that your story doesn't end in loss. And your story doesn't end in defeat. And your story doesn't end in abuse. Your story does not end there. That is not the final point. That is not the end of your story. Your story is not going to end in poverty. Your story is not going to end in loss. Your story is not going to end in death. That is not the final chapter of your story, friends. The best part of your story has yet to be written. The best part of your story is being authored right now as you sit here. The best part of your story is yet to come. See, your current situation is not your final destination. God still has many beautiful, amazing chapters ahead of you. God still has a beautiful plan for your life. God still has a beautiful destiny for you. See, it doesn't end when we mess up. It doesn't end when we're in heartbreak. Our best days are still ahead of us. In Philippians 1:6, it says this: "He who began a good work in you will carry it unto completion." Your future, my friends, is larger than your present pain. Your future, my friends, is larger than your current situation. Your future, my friends, is larger than what the doctor said. Your future is much larger than anything you are facing right now. Hagar's story doesn't end in defeat and abandonment. We hear all about the despisement. But I want to tell you, friends, that after Isaac was born, so Sarah in the story eventually does get pregnant, and they do have a son. But now Sarah has a son, and Hagar has a son. And Hagar is already not happy with Sarah. So they begin to conflict. And things get hard, and there's too much tension in the house. And so Sarah says to Abraham, you need to let her go. You need to kick her out. You need to send her in the wilderness. You need to get her out of our camp, get her out of our life, take her son, and go. Now, Sarah's the one who put her here. Sarah is the one who created this whole situation. And now Sarah's tired of the situation, so she's like, get rid of her. And so many times, I hope it hasn't happened to you, but it's so many times in life, people just discard us like we're not useful for anything. People just disregard us because they don't see value in us anymore. See, in a moment, Sarah saw value in Hagar. She was the way to the dream. But all of a sudden, there's no more value in Hagar. So kick her out. Get rid of her. And so many times that's happened to us. People just kick us out. They just disregard us. They get rid of us. I want to tell you, it doesn't end there, guys. It does not end there. And so in Genesis 21:14, Abraham does send her into the wilderness. Abraham goes to Hagar and like, girl, you got to go. Pack up your kid. Pack up your things. Now, this is his son. This is his son. And he's kicking his son out. He's kicking the mother of his son out. And so he tells her, look, Sarah don't like you no more. We don't need you. It's time for you to go. And so he makes Hagar pack up Ishmael, that was the name of their son, and pack up all of their belongings, and he casts her out into the wilderness. Can you imagine her story? Now she's a single mom in the wilderness with a little boy. All she wanted to do was her job. Sweep floors and fold laundry. Give the camels water. Now she's a single mom and she's discarded. So Abraham in Genesis 21:14, he sends her out into the wilderness, and it's one of the most painful parts of Hagar's story because now she's alone. See, at least when she was in Abraham's house, they had food, they had shelter, they had protection. Now she's on her own. And it reminds us, this part of her story, that a lot of times, sadly, human acceptance is conditional. People want you around as long as you serve them a purpose. People are okay with you when it benefits them, but when they no longer see the benefit, they're not okay with you anymore. People are good with you until there's an offense, and then when there's offense, the offense is bigger than what they value you or your friendship or your relationship, and so they just discard you. And so here we have in this situation, we see how often human acceptance, because it's so conditional, it just is willing to discard. And so Hagar just gets discarded. She's just thrown away. And she's no longer secure. And she no longer has a place to lay her head. And she no longer has food for her son. See, people can say that they love you and they support you and they are for you in one moment. But then for whatever reason, they turn around and they throw you to the lions. Hagar got thrown to the lions. But I want to tell you today, friends, that Hagar was not unknown to God. And in the midst of everything, he saw her. And in the midst of everything, and all of the abuse and the rejection, and all of the despair, in all of the breaking of her heart and the loss of her dreams, in all of it, God saw her, and his eyes were upon her. And we are told in Genesis chapter 1, verse 13, God said to Abraham, "Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman, because he is your seed." God is reminding Abraham, that's your son, you know. He's your child. And because I said I would bless you, I will still bless your child. See, the story of Hagar didn't stop because Abraham kicked her out into the wilderness. The wilderness was not her graveyard. The wilderness is not where she died. The wilderness is not where she was left alone. The wilderness is not the end of her story. And sometimes we feel like we're in a wilderness. Things are not going right. Things are not working. Things are just not happening the way I thought it would. My dream is not unfolding the way I thought it would. My life is not going where I thought it would. My health is not going where it should be. My finances are not looking like they should. And sometimes we feel like we're in a wilderness. I want to tell you today, friends, this is not your graveyard. This was not her graveyard. It became the place where God sustained her. It became the place where God met her. It became the place where God revealed himself to her and revealed the next chapter of her life. This is the beauty of Hagar's story. See, what people do to us, friends, has no power to cancel the plan of God in our lives. The things we go through, friends, has no power to cancel what God has for you. The loss that you experience, the hurt, the heartbreak, it has nothing to do with God's plan for you. His plan remains intact. His favor over you remains intact. His love over you remains intact. Everything about him towards you remains intact. God met Hagar, and he blessed her. He heard her cry. He saw her pain, and he opened her eyes to provision, and he spoke destiny over her son. She wasn't abandoned by God. And when people abandon us, God never will. He never will. I want to speak to you this morning, and I want to tell you guys that life does not stop because a hard time comes. Life does not stop because someone mishandles our heart. Life should not stop because someone has done something to harm us. Our life should not stop because someone discarded our dreams or abandoned us. Our lives should not stop because someone used us or abused us or lied or misled us. Life does not stop because you made a bad decision or you made a mistake. Where you are today, friends, is not the final chapter of your story. Where you are today is not the end. I want to tell you, where you are today, this is not it. In all of the midst of the wilderness and the pain and the regret, you will not die here. You will rise. You will not stay here. You will rise because there is a God who is bigger than every circumstance and every situation and every report of the doctor. There is a God who is bigger than everything that we can imagine. And I want to tell you today that he is with you, that he is for you, and you can call on him today and he will answer you and he will reveal the next chapter to you. I want to tell you today that whatever the wilderness is, whatever the hard time is, whatever the hurt is, he will meet you today and he will free you from it and he will show you the next chapter. His mercy and his grace are always available to us. His mercy and his grace are always available to those who want a way out. He will meet you, my friends, in the wilderness. He will send his angels to guide you. He will reveal to you his plan. God is with you today, friends. Would you stand with me, please? All over this house. Josh, no, Kiran. I don't know what it is you're carrying today. I don't know what hurts your heart. I don't know what keeps you up at night, what's running through your mind. I don't know what's making your shoulders feel heavy. But I want to tell you today, I know the one who does. And I know that he will and he has already made the way for you to step out of it. He's always provided every healing. He's already provided every freedom. Whatever it is you need today, he has it for you. This is not your end, friends. This is just the beginning of the amazing rest of your life.